So what were your first couple of lessons with Brookmire like? What was the trajectory that he set you on?
So it's all very scary. All of us have this first scary experience with Bob. Bob loved to, he would only be there 6 times a semester. But you met with him, I believe, 2 hours each time he was there. So you meet with him like twice. Not a 2-hour stretch, but like maybe twice in that week or something like that. And for Bob, like, oh, and of course, you know how NEC you can split your lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But I did full Bob like the whole time I was there. So some people just got half Bob and then half someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So what he liked to do with the entering class, and initially he didn't really take undergraduates at the time when I was there. He did later on. He would have us meet in a group lesson the first week, and it was scary. Because here you are with people that you just met, and they're at the time, you know, they would take in like, let's say it was like three new grad students. So there were 3 of us. We meet on a Tuesday, and he's like playing your music and critiquing it in front of your colleagues that you just met. And you're sitting there for 2 hours listening to all of this. And then he gives you these exercises. And I'm just saying this, I know everybody had the same experience. He gave us this exercise to complete by the next day. And it was really funny because it's called the white note exercise. And he gave us the white note exercise, and he's asking us to write 2 or 3 of these by the next day. So the next day we go back. He plays through them, and he's critiquing them in front of your colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, no, this doesn't work. Why are you doing this? This doesn't make any sense. And I remember him saying that about mine. And then he starts to play another colleague of mine, Gabe's. He puts Gabe's up, and he's like playing it, and he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, this is not bad. And he turns to me, he's like, Ayn, this is what I was expecting from you.
Oh, man. Come on.
And then the last day we had our first one-on-one for an hour. But, you know, he was such he could be really intimidating, but was such a generous soul. And he really loved music. He had a great sense of humor. But he was very firm, and he really made you think about what you were doing. And when he said something like that, you have to really be like, okay, he's being very matter of fact. You got to make sure that that's in your head. He also wouldn't say that to you if he didn't believe that you had the possibility of moving past that,
Mm-hmm.
that you had more to give, you know. So he wouldn't and when he gave you props, it was like amazing.
Sure.
Because you're like, holy, you know, like, wow, I actually, you know, I made Bob Brookmire happy.
Sure. Yeah.
But he was a very loving person as well too. Although I think sometimes there's a little bit like, if he loved you, he loved you. If he didn't care for you, you knew that too. So
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. But he was so generous with his time and so generous with, himself. He made himself very available. You know, even past the time I was at NEC, and that was just like, that's just amazing. You know, what a gift.
Sure. He may have also come from a certain generation of people that were really no nonsense, but it means something when, you know, okay, we got it right this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You know, and just also the fact that he had played in so many different types of situations, lived in different places around the world, and, you know, he had like a lot of life experience, if you will.
Sure. Yeah, no doubt. So for those listening, the white note exercise is you get, correct me when I go off the rails here, but you get is it an octave?
Yes.
And you have to stick to C major.
Yes.
White notes, and in the bass is pedal C.
Yes. So here's the funny thing, though, because I was talking to somebody else, and someone said, "Oh, when you did it with me, you did like a pedal A." I'm like, "That's weird," but okay. But yeah, in general, it's a pedal C. It's within an octave. White notes only, as we call it, just C major. 4/4 time was the way that I was taught. Again, if you're different, people have different tweaks on this.
Okay.
So 4/4 time away from the instrument, right?
Oh, really? So you
Yeah.
had to write it. Okay.
And it's like a page of manuscript paper. And part of it being away from the instrument so that you're not on autopilot, like, you know, if you're writing something and then like you're just automatically playing something and you like write it down.
Sure.
It's more about what's up here if it translates directly to your pencil, because I know for a fact that when I first started doing it, I was writing it out. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great, and I go play it. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And so it's the discipline. Is what I tell my students is the discipline of really understanding this sort of music that goes on in your head that sounds so perfect, and whether or not you are able to really capture that. And the instrument gets in the way of that because you're hearing something that's produced sometimes by automatic pilot and also sometimes something that's not internal necessarily. But again, for different, he did use it also as a tool for improvising. Okay. So obviously when you're doing it with improvising, you're not writing it out. And it's a different, but he wants you to focus, you know, there's a little bit more focus, I think particularly in time, intention, resolution, in making sure every note is weighted equally, the direction and motivic development that's happening. Are you conscious of what you're doing?
Okay.
Yeah.
As I think of it as being, as I understand it, he was big on fill the page. You want to just create music, and it seems to me one of these things that'll get you outside of your comfort zone to do something like that. Say, all right, here are the limitations. These are the limitations within which I have to work. But it's interesting. I was a little surprised to hear that he was so critical of it, because it seems like sort of a way of generating ideas. But I wonder if you could, it may not be easy to do, but I wonder if you could describe, and I don't want to make you relive your terrifying beginnings of this, but what might be something where you'd say, okay, this could have been done better within the confines of this exercise? Or like how might it go? I don't know. How might you construct a melody within that context that really works as opposed to doesn't work?
I mean, it is the biggest thing that happens with the white note exercise the first time people do it is people tend to have too many ideas. They have no direction. And because I give this to my students, and this is how I can examine them. And so the idea primarily behind it is motivic development and telling the story of that. You're not talking about any kind of song form. You're basically just seeing what your musical idea is and how you can lead that throughout the whole thing. Another problem that happens is people don't think about by the way, you're also away from harmony, right? You're not using any chords or anything like that. So it's purely about the line and examining the line about where the cadence is. A lot of people don't cadence melodically. They don't think of cadencing melodically. And so that's another aspect that becomes a problem. And then the other aspect too is not having tension resolution, which I guess applies towards cadencing. But if you're hanging out too much on the weak tones, as we think of within C major, so 2, 4, 6, and 7, then it starts to have this sense of like being ambiguous and not having any direction or just wandering is what I call it. So I think when I do kind of do it like Brookmire, and like I kind of throw it at my students and see what happens. I do mention the fact that I'm looking for motivic development, that this isn't like an AABA form, and not to think about harmony, although harmony may be implied. But I feel like sometimes if I give them a slight nudge also in talking about having cadences, that's important. But I see the results still being the same most of the time.
Sure. So you still teach this to your composition students in the beginning?
I have a class called the Compositional Techniques of Bob Brookmire. And so I introduce all these exercises that I went through with them. And so yeah, in the hopes of having them generate, my thinking behind it is to generate organic material that's theirs.
Sure.
So that's part of it.
What are some of the other exercises that you did with him?
So there's another one called the major seventh exercise. In the left hand, like if you're looking at a grand staff of a piano, the left hand is going down by half notes and going down chromatically as major sevens. And then in the right hand, you create lines, and it goes down and it goes up. The left hand does. So you're going to create just continuous eighth notes. So there's no rhythmic aspect to this. This is more of a pitch exercise. And you can't use at the time whatever is in the left hand. So the first two beats is going to be C and B. So you have the possibility of using 10 notes against that. And you can't repeat a note. You also want to avoid using like melodic intervals of perfect fourths and fifths, because the idea behind this, it is an atonal exercise. And so melodic fourths and fifths will actually suggest cadencing. And also want to try to avoid patterns. You want to try to go and have like non-symmetrical type of shapes, maybe almost like going over the bar line type of a situation. And also you don't want to imply any sort of harmony with what's going on in the left hand. But it's a kind of opposite of the white note, because this is meant to be like totally atonal, where we can have try to have equal value of each pitch, but also not to try to have it sound like a chromatic scale kind of a vibe.
Sure.
A voice leading exercise he does is called, different people have different titles for it. For me, it was called the 3-note collection, where he gives you a starting point. These are moving by half notes. He gives you a starting point of a 3-note collection. So, like, for example, it could be like C, D, and G, right? And then measure 7, he'll give you another 3 notes. And so you have to figure out how to get from one point to the next.
Okay.
So it's like a voice leading exercise.
Were there harmonies built into that, or is it just...
No. These are going to be non-traditional triads, or trichords, I guess is a better word for it. So yeah, it's again trying to think out of the box.
Sure.
Yeah, so you might have like configurations that are like fourths or fifths harmonies. You try to avoid root position triads if you can, although like diminish and augmented are okay. But it's a voice leading type of exercise, and it's fun because it actually helps you to create some non-conventional sounds which you can insert in a conventional type of a progression.
I was recently rereading Dave Ravello's book, In Conversation, and there's a quote in there where Bob Brookmire says, "The purpose of the exercise is to bring you to a place that is cold and unforgiving." Something like that. It was like, the idea was just to take you out of your comfort zone and sort of force you into a new way of thinking.
Oh yeah, I mean definitely, he was very good at that for sure.
What did you get out of, for example, I don't want to say it like that, but what was the value to you in the major seventh exercise, the chromatic thing? Is that more to open your ears up to that, or is it to find new ways of getting around, let's say, the music in an atonal setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, opening your ears, is a good way of thinking of that. But for me, it made me pay attention a little bit more to like shapes and direction, and one of the things that I always tell my students is, even if you don't do the exercise in a successful way, you've succeeded in creating material. So you can always take that material and compose whatever you want with it. And so with the major seventh, it just really opened up my ears a little bit more to having, to figuring out how I can be in this sort of like non-tonal setting. And I like to put it against a tonal setting. So you have sort of like, sometimes it's a dual tonality or more intervallic relationship type of situation. I think that's what the major seventh exercise does for me. It also allows, like, if I am writing something that sounds a little bit more conventional or traditional, a way to be out of that particular that kind of a writing style in a piece where I can have some tension in there, and that's what the major 7 did for me.
It's interesting that you mentioned the sort of let's say that the white note exercise and the chromatic exercise are in many ways sort of opposites of one another, but both of them are going to make you think about one side of that and maybe bring it together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do is I will make my students write like a white note, and then I'd be like, all right, now take like the phrase or whatever if it works, and now just go ahead and like don't even think about it. This is where it's fun. Don't even think about it. Literally, like put something up a half step or put something down a half step. Like just mess with it a little bit, because if the shape is intact, right, in a conventional way, then it should be pretty good if you also alter it chromatically. And they're surprised by that result. And I always say, like, I guess it's kind of like a Miles thing. It's just, but, you're a half step away from something you like, so.
Sure.
That's, I there's this applicable too. Is the white note for me, the biggest thing with that is even on a macro level, because it also teaches you about development. And so I find that those are the lessons that I learned from that. One other exercise that I do use a lot and I think is very useful is called the pitch module. And so you could have a motif and just take the pitches out of that, whatever those pitches are. And then you're going to figure out all the different permutations that you can have with it. And not only that, so just obviously rearranging the transposition, but then the last thing you can do with it is you look at the intervallic relationships and just sort of go free with those same type of intervals. And the fun part about that is that it really gives you all of this pitch material that relates back to whatever it is you're starting. Then to go hand in hand with that, there's the rhythmic module exercise where you're taking the rhythms and you're doing the same thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I find those two exercises to me are very good problem-solving exercises.
Okay.
Because when you're stuck, you're like, what am I doing here? I don't know where to go next. It's like, well, what material do you have? Have you taken that material and have you broken it down to generate more material?
Mm-hmm.
And so then that will give you the next place that you need to go to.
Sure. I was going to ask if you still will practice writing with these exercises, but it sounds like it may be a tool just in the midst of writing a piece. You can then use this as a jumping off point to try to create something new if you get stuck.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing is because, in the initial stages, I guess you can call it, like in the initial stages when you're learning an instrument or you're starting to master it, playing etudes and all of that kind of stuff is what really helps you. And now as you get into a regular routine or a regiment in sort of practicing, you're not going through like the whole Arbenz book, to warm up. You have like, okay, I got to do my scales, I got to do my long tones and etc. arpeggios. And so the thing is, in the beginning when I started writing, is that I did a ton of these exercises, and so I can pull material from that. But I will, as part of maintenance, I guess you could say, it's just write a white note, just to get the juices flowing before I even write something. Mm-hmm. It's literally a warm-up. It's a great warm-up. And but I will use these tools and exercises to generate material, mm-hmm. for sure. And also, sometimes I even do it on purpose because I'm like, all right, the last piece I wrote sounded like Frankenstein. I'm going to write something pretty. And so what's the best exercise? What are the best exercises for that? I'm like, well, 3-note collection and white note works really well in that direction. Mm-hmm. So then I'm like, try to find things that work with that.